Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, Striving for Better Business Outcomes? Who isn't? Learn how a new generation of workflow tools enables cooperation between business and IT. My name is Teresa Resick. I'm the Director of Market Intelligence here at AIIM, and AIIM is your host and producer of today's event. And with me today are thought leader Nathaniel Palmer and Mike Nishiki of IBM. And IBM is the underwriter of today's webinar, and we thank them very much for their support. And thank you all for taking the time to join us today. And as we get started, I just want to offer a few quick pointers for participating in today's webinar. By joining the event live, you can resize the windows that you have in front of you. I encourage you to open the group chat so that you can instant message with each other and also with a few of us here at AIIM. And the link for group chat is in the list of icons across the bottom of your screen. I also encourage you to download the resources. We have a lot of good links for some really good educational materials for you, and that's to the right of your slide area. When you click on that, that's going to open in a new browser tab, and you can save that to view it after the webinar. Do ask questions of our speakers with the Q&A feature, and we'll do our best to get to all of those questions later in the webcast, where we should hoping to have about 5 or 10 minutes for our Q&A time. Towards the end of our webinar, we will launch out a survey for you, but the link to that is also in the list of icons across the bottom of your screen. I greatly value your feedback and encourage you to share with us just what you thought of today's webinar. And this webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to AIM.org's Resources Webinars page in just a few days. I do want to introduce the speakers we have with us today. I'm thrilled to have both these gentlemen with us. And Nathaniel Palmer is a best-selling author, speaker, practitioner, and influential thought leader in business process management. Nathaniel has been the chief architect for large-scale and complex projects involving investments of $200 million or more. He has authored a dozen books on technology and business transformation and is a regular speaker and leading industry forums, as well as being featured in national media. Nathaniel also serves as executive director of the Workflow Management Coalition, the industry's longest-standing BPM adoption group. And then we also have with us today Michael Nishiki of IBM, and he's their North American DBA solutions leader. And Mike has more than 20 years of global experience working with highly regulated organizations as a business architect and translating business strategy into solutions that digitally transforms and optimizes business performance. And so right now, I'm going to turn things over to Nathaniel to begin our talk today. Nathaniel?
Great. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you for joining us today. And indeed, we're amidst an exciting time in the process management space. There really is a new generation of workflow that is bridging business and IT and providing outcomes that weren't possible before. To talk about this and to understand what's new and why it's exciting, just to contrast that with where we've been over the last decade or so with workflow automation, to use warehouse automation as a metaphor. As we see here, this is the state of the art for the last decade or so in warehouse automation. You have architects and engineers that would design the optimal pathways, but they're immovable. They're very much one size fits all. These pathways don't adjust based on what's in a particular package or if one package has urgency over another. They're indifferent to what's the context of what's passing through them. And workflow automation has been largely like that. We would design the best process, but then that process would be fixed until we would go and bring IT in to change the process. But warehouse automation has evolved. This here showing Amazon's latest warehouse, where they've bought a robotics company called Kiva. And here, the pathways do adjust based on the packages. The robots know what's in the package, and they adjust their pathways accordingly, and they actually can learn and make decisions about the organization of where things are placed and how things can get out more optimally. Now, in reality, the robots themselves aren't learning. They're remote controlled. What's happening is we have systems that are controlling the robots. Essentially here we have intelligent automation at play, where we're able to learn based on data and to refine our rules and to make optimal decisions and define our processes in an optimal way based on the context of what's happening in the business. That's the same metaphor and the same reality of what we're seeing with intelligent automation as it's being applied to business. Now, we've devised 3 rules that define intelligent automation. Well, I've devised. Robots, rules, or the 3 R's, rather, which are robots, rules, and relationships. So in the case of robots, we're talking about things that can act as a means of automation as well as the ability to learn, to actually apply machine learning to the systems to get smarter. Intelligent automation is very much dependent on rules and decisioning rather than just the rigid workflow pathways that we'd had previously. And the third is relationships. If you think about what it takes to define a customer, today the context for that customer relationship and those business interactions are defined not so much by the systems that you control internally, but by data that's coming from partner systems, from the customer's own systems, as well as from external data that's happening in the marketplace. And being able to act on that data collectively and comprehensively by knowing what the feeds are and what the points are, rather than simply having that data locally controlled in one place. So the 3 R's are robots, rules, and relationships. But again, with robots, we're not talking about things that are acting on their own in a rogue, maverick way. In fact, robots require rules. Robots only do what they're told to do. And when we think about the application of AI and differentiating between robotic automation and machine learning, robots are prescriptive, require structured data, structured rules, where AI, we're able to apply in these intelligent systems, is about being able to create a learning loop where we're able to refine those rules and learn through the practice of business. So together, the factors which are distinguishing and differentiating intelligent automation from past generations of workflow automation is that it is very data-driven. We're acting on the context of business rather than simply what we're prescribing in advance. And in that way that we're able to make it goal-oriented, where we have outcomes that we need to achieve. We won't know the exact pathway to get there until we go through the steps and are able to process the rules and the data and in order to determine what is the best pathway to reach that rule. And in doing so, making our processes inherently adaptive and making the ability for what we can automate much broader reaching than where we have to define it all in advance in a very prescriptive way. So that changes the nature of the process itself and how we view and define workflow. So previously, for the past couple of decades with workflow automation, most of the effort was spent up front in the analysis and definition of the optimal workflow, with some basic exceptions that are predefined. But we're defining in a very prescriptive way what the sequence of steps is, what we're going to do in a sequential way. Again, with some exceptions, but they're all known knowns as opposed to defining how we're going to respond to unknown events. With intelligent automation, we're able to create adaptive pathways where it's more the rules in the business context and the data that's coming from business events that are defining the sequence. We're keeping in place the control and guardrails based on rules, based on policy. So it's not as though things are being done in an ad hoc way. We're guiding what the next best action is or what the next step should be in order to reach that outcome based on those rules, based on the context of what's happening at that moment and how that fits within our objectives and goals for the business. So what does this look like in terms of a platform? We're saying that this is a new generation, and indeed it is. It is also now what we're talking about, a platform. It's a sum of the parts rather than just one thing. Over the past couple of decades, we focused on BPMS as a more singular entity, workflow systems. Really, intelligent automation is a set of capabilities working together, leveraging robotic automation with the ability, but separate capability of machine learning and AI, which allows us to not just learn, but to be able to close the gap between the predefined and more structured rules, but having that framework of decision logic where we have rules managed as a policy, not just as code within our system, but managing rules as part of our knowledge base and the collective business logic which define our systems. And then ultimately having process management, the sequencing of work and the means by which workflow is enacted. And if we think about this as a platform that's very data-driven, where we're bringing into this a closed loop, the system is affecting and acting on steps and engaging with other systems which are providing input that's being factored on and ultimately being managed as part of an adaptable process. But as you look at this picture, there's one thing which may seem to be notably absent. You look at it and think, well, where is the UI? Well, that's another shift in both our understanding and the capabilities that are provided by this new generation of workflow technology. In fact, the UI is all of these pieces. And part of intelligent automation is rethinking the idea of the interface as being a thing, as being a screen that we have workers sitting in front of or customers interacting with, where we're prescribing how that work occurs based on the design of that screen. The reality is we're undergoing this explosion of new devices, not just mobile devices, but essentially everything is an interface, and everything has a means for interaction with customers, with partners and employees. So in order to enable this and leverage these capabilities, we need to rethink the idea of work, to restructure the task and remove how that work is performed from what is the outcome, what is the business objective that we're trying to do, and enable that to be formed by a system where the interface could be any number of things or can't be anticipated in advance. It may be a smart speaker, an Amazon or Google or any number of growing appliances where now we're interacting in a conversational way. That increasingly is becoming a metaphor for how we interact with customers and increasingly how we actually interact with employees and others. But the core mission for the process and the business needs to be able to perform in the same consistent way, following the same rules and pursuing the same goals, regardless of the interface that's used. So now I'm going to pivot and end my part talking about an actual case study where we've applied intelligent automation to a knowledge work scenario. So this is a case where we're not using automation simply to automate part of the task, and there are aspects where automation is being applied at a discrete point. But specifically, we're using robotic automation to perform the complete task in the same way and using the same systems that our knowledge workers are otherwise doing, and in doing so, being able to yield very significant business benefit and efficiency. So looking at this at a high level, and I'm going to go through some of these slides, are going to have quite a bit of detail, and rather than squinting at your screen, you can come back and you'll have access to these slides later. The first picture is at a high level showing that we've created the first part of the system. The first application of AI in this case is to anticipate that work and determine whether or not that work is best acted on by a human being or by a robot, in this case a software robot, RPA software. Then that work is performed. The actual work management is being managed by a case management system, a BPM platform, and that's using a mix of decision services with AI and automation capabilities, as well as middleware that's reaching out and interacting with external systems. So that part, the AI that we're using to determine whether or not that work can be performed by a human being or a robot, that's an instance of what we call deterministic AI. Specifically, we've defined the parameters. It doesn't just magically decide. That decision is based on a huge number of variables that are evaluated in real time, where we're pulling data from multiple systems, including HR systems and a number of real-time databases that determine what is the right worker at that moment to perform this specific task relative to their capabilities of all other available workers, the priorities of the business at that moment, the available tasks that could otherwise be acted on at that moment. It's a level of complexity that can only be done effectively using this type of decisioning capability or this application of AI. But it's based on rules that we define and that we're able to manage. It's not AI simply acting autonomously on its own. So once that determination is made, and when it's handed to the robot worker, they are now performing that task, and this is a high-level depiction of the actual process at that moment. And they're acting on this just as one of our human knowledge workers would do, but they're working on tasks which have a fairly finite boundary, or what we would consider those of lower complexity. And that's one of the challenges with how we leverage these capabilities, and why we have that need to be able to triage and understand what is appropriate work for AI or the robotic capability to perform versus a human being, where we are applying real know-how and we're having to make decisions that can't be interpreted in advance but have to be evaluated, applying subject matter expertise and what a human being can do. That's what we want our human workers doing, but that's how we want to prioritize their time to be focused on that. We want them to be doing meaningful work where we can identify much more simplistic pathways, and not just tasks, not just a discrete moment, but an actual case that by itself meets characteristics that are relatively simple, that we can separate and apply automation to, and allow us to get both better leverage as well as having a more meaningful experience for our knowledge workers. So part of this is defining when the robot does face an issue with the UI that it can't act on. And again, we're applying RPA in this use case to the same system that's used by our knowledge workers, and we have a lot of instruction there to guide the human being, but also there's a fair amount of subjectivity. There are things that happen unexpectedly that a human being can react to very quickly, but if we haven't programmed that scenario, the robot, it's going to fail. So part of this design and part of this intelligence is to be able to give that error handling capability to the robot so it knows how to respond, but also to be able to control the parameters of the work that they receive so that they are only working on things that are appropriate for them. And this slide, I'm going to go through very quickly, but it shows the interaction points with the overall system and the pathway that's defined for the completing of a case overall, and how we've created some exception paths specifically to accommodate the robot worker versus the human worker. And you may want to look at that in greater detail offline. So quickly, as I wrap up, some of the lessons learned. One of the issues, again, is that robots require rules. They only are able to act on that which we explicitly define. There is talk and there is, frankly, some confusion around the notion of applying AI to robots to have them act more autonomously and behave in a way that seems much more subjective. And some of that is, frankly, still in the realm of science fiction. Some of that is stuff that can be done in fairly discrete areas, things that aren't as complex as knowledge work, but where AI and machine learning can make basic determinations and essentially act as a rule system. But overall, it can only perform work in which we've defined. But the difference, and one of the key cognitive gaps in understanding RPA versus workflow automation and how they come together for intelligent automation, is that while the RPA is defined using a visual flow-based metaphor, we're not defining the workflow. We're not creating a new version of the process with RPA. We're creating an actor that can perform that work the same way as a human being. And that requires a different mentality and a different way of thinking. And that's one of the takeaways is the skill set that's required, or that's ideally used for developing these systems, needs to be one that understands things around the nuance of the UI and the user experience. That gap is something that's often misunderstood up front until you progress and go through the process of actually developing and leveraging these capabilities. But that's also part of the fact that understanding the benefit of automation sometimes is hard to grasp by non-IT users, by business stakeholders. Ultimately, this is something that provides a new leverage point for business. We're not simply building systems in the same old way, but we're creating capabilities that can be easily tuned and adapted and expanded in many ways to add value to the business. But the business stakeholders need to understand both the limitations as well as the capabilities, and to have this new lens to think about how they're achieving business objectives as opposed to simply achieving technical outcomes in the way that we did previously. We can talk more about this in the Q&A, but I'm going to hand it over to Mike Nishiki, who's going to talk more about what's happening with IBM.
Thank you, Nathaniel. Appreciate it. Hi, folks. My name is Mike Nishiki, and I'm with IBM, as it states. I'm going to take you through what IBM is experiencing, very exciting things that are going on, and in fact, really supports what Nathaniel had just talked about, quite a few things, in fact. So let me talk you through what we've seen with our customers. Folks in AIIM will certainly know what this is, right? So a lot of what we've been seeing is just transforming a pretty, manual processes or paper-based processes, right? And getting it into a digital format. So we're all familiar with that part of it. But as we're moving forward, if you look at it from a bell curve perspective, this is probably where most of our customers are sitting right now in this area called systems of engagement. And it's in that area that we would consider a sort of the work management era. Exactly what Nathaniel was talking about, right? We've had many years now of business process management, and nowadays just, automation at a very basic level. And a lot of that also is about dealing with the paper that we've transformed. So a lot of companies in general are realizing the benefits of digital transformation. But once they get transformed, they realize further that there's a lot of the benefits of the process management that often was, you would say, it was a situation where you would stop at a human worker, and that human worker would essentially, have to make a decision. So that straight-through process that we were anticipating originally with BPM didn't always happen because there was these individuals that had the role of a knowledge worker that, they literally think for a living and they make decisions. So a lot of what we're trying to do now, as we've gone through this journey, those knowledge workers actually benefit and should benefit from automation. And there's a lot of areas that we've made available to a knowledge worker, including simply just extracting data from documents, as an example, automatically for them, right? But we're getting into areas where, things that we now start to talk about intelligent automation. I'll walk you through some of the things that, we are starting to implement with our customers. So recognizing, again, our history with our customers, as well as, recognizing what a knowledge worker really needs, and in general, a digital business really needs, is that there needs to be a full integration across all of these areas. Nathaniel talked about robotic process automation. That's represented there in the chart as tasks. Workflow we're familiar with. That's both in business process management as well as case management. And decisions are, as Nathaniel talked about, rules, but you can also think of it in terms of decision tables. Okay, and content. AIM is very familiar with content, obviously, from enterprise content management. And I'll talk a little bit more about what the changing landscape looks like for content, and also capture. Capture, for most folks, it used to be just, scanning paper, but now it's extracting what we sometimes call dark data and extracting meaning from that document and making use of it, right? All of that tied together needs to happen both in a unified user experience, which can essentially drive a lot of the applications and how they take advantage of all of these capabilities in the platform. But ultimately, what we're doing as far as IBM is concerned is we're also focusing on the operational intelligence, the machine learning part of it, because there's a lot of information that's being generated as you're working with these various capabilities. And over time, you get institutional knowledge that isn't really leveraged, and it makes sense to be able to do that. But ultimately, we also want to make sure that we've got the governance involved with it, so that altogether, what we're basically trying to do here is not just the governance of applications per se, but governance of the data, governance of the information. Those are very important, especially in regulatory compliance. As stated earlier, I have a lot of experience in industries that have a lot of regulatory compliance, and therefore we needed a platform that can also do all of these things, plus recognize the regulatory compliance aspects. And this is just an example of what we're realizing with intelligent automation as we're starting to see. And again, if you look at it from the bell curve in terms of that journey, more customers are in the middle part of that journey as opposed to the right side. But as we're starting to work with customers, they're taking advantage of the existing systems that they have in place, whether it's a combination of content and workflow. They see that as a basic automation that they're involved in, and they certainly have received a lot of return on investment on that. Okay, but we're realizing that again, collecting the data as it's happening over time ultimately brings about capabilities that automate further. That really frees up the knowledge worker. If you look at the bottom chart on the right, to be able to really do more things like investigations in terms of fraud, more determination, more of the types of work that involves a lot more thinking or a lot more analysis. Okay, so we're realizing that through automation, a lot of our customers are seeing that, okay, we've taken care of the automation part of it, We got some of the basics down. We've got our return on investment. What else can we do? And so in talking to them about, things like machine learning and AI, they're starting to realize, as we're doing this, we are actually starting to free up the resources in terms of the more undeterministic things that go on in our business. Okay, but while that's happening, again, AIM is in general, well known in teaching this, right? Is one of the key things that no matter happens throughout this automation process is a lot of the information that's being used by the knowledge workers still has to be trusted information. Okay, they still need to conform to governance and regulation standards. And this is not something new. It's just that because of the new technologies that tend to jump out at you and say, here, see me do this, it doesn't change the fact that if you're in a regulated industry, you still have to comply with these areas that most likely is involved. And if you do something that's outside the guidelines, you may get fined for it. You may, have other issues as far as customer service issues. There's all sorts of different reasons why you have to have some forethought into really designing an intelligent automation system. So last year we introduced a solution called the Business Automation Insights, which is part of the operational intelligence portion of the platform that I just talked about. And essentially most people understand that as, okay, well, I can look at operational intelligence and look at a bunch of dashboards. Sure, we know we can do that. We have been doing that, and we continue to do that. So collecting and visualizing is certainly part of what we do in terms of what we call business automation insights. But one of the key things is looking at the institutional knowledge in terms of what can we measure from that? What are the outcomes? Are they good or bad outcomes? And how can we then use that information, that institutional knowledge, to then guide our knowledge worker, right? And that's what this is all about, right? What we're seeing in terms of our investments into intelligent automation is really looking towards the future in terms of what our customers are actually looking for now. Okay, so beyond basic automation, as Nathaniel had talked about, is what's the next best action, right? What are some of the recommendations that we can say based on institutional knowledge, based on the previous outcomes? Is can we actually recommend let's say a new policy? Can we recommend a way to handle it differently, right? Because we've learned over time. And then ultimately, if we have a list of tasks as part of our workflow, right, certainly we want to be able to prioritize that because, we don't want a situation where something that is of higher importance doesn't necessarily get handled as well as it should. And again, this reflects back to the business goals, because if you have a customer relationship management issue in terms of if you're ever working on a customer journey mapping and you start to look at all the places where it maps back to back-end systems, is it really prioritizing in terms of customer satisfaction? Is that one of the criteria or one of the rules, right? That's one of the key things that we have to look at. Now, what we have also realized is that we want to make this automated as well. We want to make what it takes to become intelligent, right? So what we've created is the ability to take advantage of the business automation insights, which we just introduced last year, and we're starting to look at the digital agent. Now, Nathaniel kind of talked about bots per se or RPA bots, but we take it a little bit further than that. In fact, let me reiterate what Nathaniel was talking about, but give you a different analogy. When I talk to customers about RPA, is try to imagine a player piano with the paper roller with all the holes in it, right? That's pretty prescriptive, in terms of what it can play. But now we want to bring about some intelligence so that that player piano can actually play on an ad hoc basis whatever you want it to play, right? But essentially you have constraints, right? It's still a piano, but you're giving it some guardrails in terms of how it can actually play different songs. So we're doing that with RPA as well. So RPA is definitely part of our platform in general, but we're also looking at other business automation applications that we can deploy, as part of our design tool. And then any other business applications that you might currently have, that you can also include these digital agents as part of a design implementation. So that's the far right. But as we've talked about, business still needs to control the aspects of what they know best, right? They are the subject matter experts of their business, right? So we have to give them the opportunity to control what it is that they consider an agent. So I'll give you an example of an agent, right? An eligibility agent, right? That eligibility agent is, you can call it the expert that understands eligibility. But yet you need to incorporate that in the overall process that the line of business really cares about. So eligibility agent doesn't necessarily take away a human eligibility expert, but what it does is it greatly scales that person by making sure that a lot of the mundane, we can call it administrivia, but it's just say that a lot of the repeatable type of tasks are being carried out in a way that has some expertise around it that was originally built by the line of business. So now we've got the line of business being able to create these digital agents, okay? And that's what we're trying to increase is, how do we get that expertise from the line of business and infuse that into the process? And what that starts to look like, and I know Nathaniel mentioned this earlier, what does a user interface of this kind tend to look like? And this is something that, IBM has, from a low-code creation of user interfaces, in this case, applications, if you will, is that concept of dragging and dropping different components, of a application page or multiple application pages. But the concept here that I'm going to cover is simply this, right? Let's just say that Mary Jones is a member, customer, or citizen patient, okay? And I need to, I hate using that term 360-degree view, but, in that moment, I need the information. Now, it used to be I had to go and search for things, right? I had to go find things on different applications or go find things in my, local document repository. But what we want is the concept called the best search is no search at all. Literally, I want automation here. So I want the knowledge worker to have everything they need in response to what it is they're trying to work on with Mary Jones. Now, ultimately, I'm going to get some kind of information from a back-end system. This one in particular is from a CRM system. It could be from an ERP system, or it could be from an EMR system. But my point is that there is a system, multiple systems, and how can we pull that forward, right? Bring that available to the knowledge worker. But we also want a persistent case record. One of the cornerstones of our workflow is that we actually have a case management workflow, but it also has what's called a persistent case record. It's actually quite robust in its ability to keep track of things. It actually has an IBM patent around it. So that's one of the key things that we would definitely expose as something that we want to include in being able to roll out an application of this kind. Also, the concept of micro-content. I talked a little bit more about content in general. It's no longer the document is the smallest unit that is stored, right, or searched for. A lot of times I find customers that literally will take time to go find the right document, right, and then find within the document, search within it to find the right paragraph. In some cases, getting to that point could eat up about almost 2 hours, okay? I'm not saying that's the average, but I'm saying that was the maximum time that I actually, when I talk to customers, that's how much time they would spend. And so how can we save that time? Well, we can actually automate that as well. Okay, so there's things that we can automate that we kind of take for granted, but that's one other area. Is just content is part of a process. Content is part of a decision. And we also want to take advantage of that machine learning and to bring together, hey, you know what, we have a recommendation. In this situation, this might be a better choice, right, based on the history of other positive outcomes. But we also want, again, not necessarily micro content, but the actual physical document that might have been submitted by the customer, or the member or the patient, but we want it all in context, okay, in terms of where we are in the process. That goes with, again, the micro content. And then back to that recommendation capabilities that we were talking about machine learning is, yeah, I want to have a list of tasks that should be performed for this given process. And then in general, I should also go back into history. I should be able to find all the related cases as well. So in essence, what we're talking about is creating a new generation of applications that is easily pulled together, that really leverages the platform that we have. And that is an example, again, reinforcing what Nathaniel is saying, is where we're taking this also. And I just, the in-context experts is like, okay, they happen to have a skill set that we know historically that they've had very good outcomes to. And so we want to be able to show, here are the experts from, given the circumstance of where we're at with Mary Jones, I want to bring about the human experts also. So that's a lot, and we have a lot more to talk about with all of our customers. And in fact, I'm here at a show called the Automation 2019, which actually talks about automation, obviously. But you can absolutely learn more. We have a lot of different options for you here. So just in general, just getting an understanding what this thing called Digital Business Automation Platform is all about, there's a link there for you. We have a short video if you're interested on what we mean by business automation workflow, and that gives you an idea of what we work with in terms of a lot of the unpredictable or undeterministic type of workflows. You'll see that in the video demo. And then lastly, which is the Business Automation Insights that was introduced last year. You'll be excited about this. This is a little bit more tech notes if you're interested in that kind of stuff, but it actually walks you through the actual product documentation. So if you're interested in that, there's a link there for you. And with that, I'm done. And Teresa, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Okay. Well, thank you. We're listening right there to Mike Nishiki of IBM, and before that, Nathaniel Palmer. Just wanting to let everybody know that, yes, some of those slides were a little complex, and if you haven't already, there's the link to download. There's the PDF of the slides in the resources. Please download that and save a copy of the slides, because there's some really good information in there. And also all of these links here that are on this slide all of those links are live links in that PDF. And all of these links here that Mike was sharing with you, that's also individually, they're in the resources as well. So a lot of different opportunities just to get a whole lot more information here. And we do have a little bit of time to take some questions here, and I'll do my best to get to all the questions that we do have. And I want to circle back with Mike first, because that last slide that you were talking about with the in-depth example in talking about the business units having a bit of the autonomy for setting up the kinds of workflows and the kind of automation that is that's needed in organizations today. And one of the things that you mentioned, with it being low code, and I know that the title talks about having this cooperation between the business units and IT. And for the skeptics among us, or for those organizations that have seen a very involved, I'll politely say, a heavy hand of IT, over the business units, how are you seeing, or are these types of platforms and applications making that cooperation possible? Mike, if I can start with you, and Nathaniel, feel free to join in.
Yeah, no, thank you, Teresa. That's a good question, in fact. And again, this is looking at a history of, where we've been. But today, in terms of, I'll give you an example. A lot of times when we're working with the line of business and IT, there's somebody in between. Usually, they might have a title of business analyst, and the tooling that we have today gives that business analyst an opportunity to prototype a application quite easily with no code. it doesn't necessarily mean this is a fact. Okay, in terms of IT governance, it still exists. You got to go from dev to test to production. IT controls that. But in terms of this prototyping, when I used to be probably 3 or 4 different business process reengineering projects, you can sit down with the end user and you can ask them, so what do you do next? What do you do next? And what's frustrating for somebody that's a business analyst trying to map that out, let's say a modeling tool, right, is there's sometimes this notion of it depends, right? It depends on the situation. And some of that, when we came across that situation of unpredictability, we started looking at dynamic case management or adaptive case management, and certainly we have that already. So we have aspects of, working with the line of business in terms of that exchange of information about how to actually create an application. We have that today. We also have the modeling tool. It's a cloud-based modeling tool that allows the business to simply go and model their workflows. They can actually collaborate between each other within the line of business, or even multiple lines of businesses, because obviously some workflows span multiple lines of businesses. And it's all cloud-based. They can actually collaborate using that. There's no IT involvement. And at some point, they've documented the workflow for that purpose. We can take that workflow and actually start to execute on it, or obviously, in my opinion, we should start to look at areas of improvement. And that, too, can be done by the line of business if they wish. But when they start to look at, hey, that step today is manual in that modeling, we can actually automate that with bots or something to that effect. Yeah, right now, today, that's something that IT gets involved in, but it's an advisement, right? What we're taking forward is this intelligent automation is really having an agent that is intelligent. And so some of that, what we will call a step in a process that had been modeled by the line of business that we would consider a opportunity to automate, we would put that into a bot, or we would use that as an intelligent agent to be able to automate several steps in the process. And we can orchestrate multiple bots through that. That's all good. We can do that for sure. So there's a lot more to say about that, but there's different toolings that allows us to interact with the line of business. And then decisions, we have a cloud-based decision tool. It's actually free. And now people are going, oh, sign me up. But it's actually free because we want the line of business to create their own decisions, right? We want them to be able to create their own rules. They can create it graphically, or they can create a decision tree, basically a table. But that by itself isn't going to run it. You create that with the line of business involvement, and then that gets imported into our rules engine, and that is what is carried out as part of it. But that business analyst is not having to do it for them, right? So we're knocking down some of those barriers one by one in key areas, and we're in the designing of the application. In fact, the last slide before the links, we're introducing the ability for the line of business to be able to start to be able to pull together their own user interface, right? And that's, again, these are steps that we're taking towards, that. I know that, there's some battles between IT and line of business a lot of times, but that's where we're knocking down those barriers.
Okay. I have another question in here, and I want to direct this to Nathaniel, because we touched on a little bit about RPA, and someone had just popped this in here, and in your mentioning RPA, someone said that they've heard that is an on-ramp to AI. Is that really the case, or how can that be the case?
Well, very carefully is the short flip answer. It can be an on-ramp to AI, but it is very distinct. Now, it is a form of AI. It is rule-based or deterministic AI. Where it can get into the other realm, and generally today when we say AI, although this is a mature area and in the field of AI, this is well understood. In the more popular discussions about AI, deterministic AI is not as commonly discussed. Almost certainly what they're talking about is machine learning, and where you're using algorithms to create more predictability around patterns based on existing data and provide a lens for interpreting new data, and to create things that can act on that. The way that it can be an on-ramp, and Mike had talked about this with this notion of the intelligent agent. And intelligent agent as a term of art had been in AI discussions for a while, but had been kind of more of a variant of RPA. Now, where you're able to use the ability for combining a machine learning algorithm to create more structure for the RPA actor to act on, or in those cases where I was talking about that the challenge with RPA is that you have to be very prescriptive in defining what it does and how it responds to specific steps. It's, no matter what, it needs those structured responses. And you can use AI and machine learning to take a much broader spectrum of potential events and translate those into more discrete things that the RPA actor can act on, rather than presenting the RPA actor with something that is previously unknown or has an element of uncertainty to it, which would cause it to fail.
And I do want to just address this other thing, because we are getting close to our webinar time here. As you may have heard, AIIM has updated our CIP exam, our Certified Information Professional exam, and we did that to reflect the latest trends in information management. So if you go to aim.org/CIP, you can learn more about the CIP program in general, and then also things specific in here, and all of the tools and resources that are available to help you prep for the exam. And I know that Jesse Wilkins, who heads up our CIP program, he went to great lengths for pulling this exam together, and just getting to sit in the background and watch the process. It's a really cool exam. I know this because I got to do a little bit involved with the CIP study guide, and as part of the exam's update, we have updated that CIP study guide, and we've also launched a course called Foundations in Intelligent Information Management. And AIIM has an offer out right now that if you sign up to take this comprehensive online program, Foundations of AIIM, you can save 20% off of the price when you use the promo code CIP19. That offer is good until the end of this month, until June 30th. And so for information on that Foundations class, go to, again, aim.org/CIP. And then in there's a link that says Get Prepared. And then in that little section, there is a link to the Foundations of AIIM class. And it's a very comprehensive course. It's great as a standalone learning tool, and it's also a fabulous resource to help you prepare for taking the CIP exam. And so Jesse and his team did a tremendous job in having a variety of learning tools available for this Foundations course, and also to help you prep for the exam itself. So again, aim.org/CIP, and just wanted to let you know all about that. And since we are just about at the end of our webinar time today, just a few last reminders. We have recorded this webinar, and we'll send a link out to everybody after everything concludes so that you can come back, listen again, or invite your colleagues to listen to this. Do download the resources. I would greatly appreciate it if you would take the feedback survey. The link for the survey is in the icons that are also open automatically when we close the webcast. I would very much like to thank our underwriter, IBM. Without the support from our solution providers, AIM would not be able to provide you with these free educational programs. So thank you, IBM, for your sponsorship and your support here. And as we do bring this webinar to a close, I just want to leave everyone with our speakers' closing thoughts. I'm going to start first with Mike Nishiki of IBM. Your closing thoughts today.
closing thought for today is we are very much on the path of the AI infused with automation, and we're looking forward to all the great things all of you are going to be able to accomplish with that, and I appreciate the opportunity here.
Thank you, Mike. And Nathaniel Palmer, your closing thoughts today.
So I think one of the things that was subtly described by both Mike and myself, that's part of this new generation of workflow and what we're calling intelligent automation, is that it does bring about multiple disciplines and both leverages that capability or that ability and also requires that understanding. If you think about business, there's no such thing in the real world as a business person. Everybody has an area of specialty, and in every organization you have not just departmental specialty, but different areas of horizontal and vertical function inside of the organization that work together in order to achieve business outcome. Traditionally, with workflow automation, we would rely mostly on heroics of developers and architects that were very focused and were able to do the whole thing. But with these new capabilities and platforms, just as Mike is describing, where we want to put in the hands the ability to define the business logic and the decision logic by having a framework for visualizing that and defining that by stakeholders, and then bring that into the platform. For AI, I was describing that or RPA specifically, well, this would apply in a different way to AI. With RPA, the development and design of the capabilities that we would ultimately deploy requires an understanding, not so much a programmatic or process-oriented one, and we need to kind of decouple that from thinking around workflows, but think more about how that work is performed and creating the ability for that actor to perform that work. And then with process, we're able to have better understood, better defined processes where we've abstracted that ability, abstracted the notion of the interface and how that work is performed from defining the task and the outcomes itself, as well as abstracting the decision pieces out. And in doing so, enabling much greater agility and much more adaptability in the processes. So this multidisciplinary approach, which parallels that of business, is now enabled by intelligent automation and platforms like IBM's that Mike described.
Okay. Well, thank you so very much. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. I know there was so much that was shared. I can't wait to listen to this again myself. So I appreciate your time. For AIM, this is Teresa Resick, and we will see you with our next webinar. Have a good afternoon.